I have no idea what I'm doing, but we're just gonna go for it. I'm Kristen, also known as Voolenvine, here on my YouTube channel, on Instagram, on Ravelry, and pretty much everywhere else on the interwebs. And as always, I'm so happy that you're taking some time to chat about all the sewing today. Normally it's knitting and sewing, but today's a very special episode because I am going to do a sew-along. I'm a little nervous, but I'm super excited because yeah, this is something new for me. A couple of weeks ago, I brought up the idea of possibly doing a sew-along on the channel to sew the Brumby Skirt, a pattern by Megan Nielsen, who is an independent pattern designer. I had already made the skirt, and I think it's a super fun, super quick, easy pattern that's perfect for beginners, those who want to dip their toes into sewing. I asked you guys and the response was unanimous, so here we are, we are doing a sew-along. And I have no idea what I'm doing, but we're just gonna go for it. But anyway, first things first, let's talk about materials, things you'll need for the sew-along. So first of all, let's talk about fabric. Right here I have some really beautiful golden mustard, not mustard, I wouldn't say, like a golden brown crepe de Chine, which is very, very drapey, very, not too slippery compared to some other slippery fabrics out there, but it is slippery nonetheless, and this is the one that I'm going to be working with today because many of you have reached out and said that you want to see how I handle slippery fabrics. Little disclaimer, I am by no means a professional sewist yet. I'm still learning the ropes myself, but I do have a couple of tips and tricks for dealing with slippery fabrics, and I think Crepe de Chine is a great place to start. So I'm going to be working with this. However, if you're not totally confident about working with slippery fabrics quite yet, this is another example of some fabric that you can work with that's a lot more stable, a lot more easier to handle and manage. This is denim. I was thinking about making a denim version, but I think I'm going to tackle the more challenging fabric for those of you who are ready to take your sewing skills to the next level. But you can certainly use denim, you can use quilting cotton, you can use chambray. Those are all great fabrics for starting out if you're a newbie sewist. And if you are going to be using more sturdier fabrics, I would definitely suggest doing version 1, which is a shorter skirt. However, I will be doing version 2, which is a longer version of the skirt. But the pattern itself is just a basic gathered skirt that falls at the waistline, and you have an option to do pockets or no pockets. But yeah, let's talk about materials. First up, you need your pattern, and that I will link down in the description box below. You can purchase the pattern, the printed version or the PDF version from Megan Nielsen's website. I downloaded the PDF version, which requires you to print out the pattern pieces and tape them together like a puzzle, and then once you have all the pieces taped together, you cut out your appropriate size. So right over here, this is the waistband. As with any pattern, you want to look for your size and then pick out your size and then look at the finished garment measurements, and that's really key. That was my downfall when I first started sewing. I just looked at my measurements and not the finished garment measurements, which can make a huge difference, especially with big 5 patterns like McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity. They build a lot of ease into their finished garment measurement. So you always want to look at the finished garment measurement to make sure that it's going to fit you appropriately. So thankfully, a lot of indie designers size things more appropriately, so they're with it, they're hip, they know what's happening. So Megan Nielsen's pattern, size 4, is a 26-inch waist, and the finished garment is a 26-inch waist, which works out perfectly for me. If you are in between sizes, you always want to go up. You want to choose the largest size because you can always slim down later. So yeah, all right, so let's get started. So you have your pattern piece all cut out, all put together, be it the PDF or the printed version, and then you want your fabric. Of course, you want your thread. So if you are using a colorful fabric like this, you always want something to match. So thankfully, I got this at the dollar store around the corner from me. Go figure. But anyway, it matches. However, you can choose whatever color you want if you want to add a little contrasty fun to your garment. Next up, you'll need some fabric shears. shears that are specifically designed for cutting out fabric. You do not want to use paper shears. Definitely invest in a good pair of fabric shears. You also want some trimming scissors to cut loose threads. These are a little bigger than they need to be, but you know, if you have some little embroidery scissors, those work well as well. And then you also want a seam ripper in case you make a mistake. And if you are new to sewing, you are going to make mistakes, my friend. I'm sorry to say it, but you are. Have a seam ripper at hand. I have about 3 of these kind of hiding around in my craft room, so it is inevitable that you will be making mistakes. So this is the eraser tool of sewists. Next up, you want either chalk marker or just something like a erasable pen, a water-soluble pen to make some markings. And then also you will want a jeans or denim zipper. It is a 7-inch or 18-centimeter zipper. The pattern actually calls for a shorter zipper, but this is all that I have, so it's really easy to kind of hack the pattern to make it fit the zipper that you do have. The pattern also suggests that if you do not want an exposed zipper, you can always swap it in for an invisible zip or an overlap zip or whatever zip strikes your fancy. You also want fusible interfacing for the waistband. That is going to stabilize it so it can take a lot of wear and tear when you sit, when you get up, when you bend, because if you don't put any fusible interfacing in your waistband, things are going to get a little wonky over time when you wash it and you wear it over and over again. So fusible interfacing is always a good thing. I buy bolts of these because I go through it so much, but this is basic heat and bond fusibles, iron-on interfacing, and it's relatively, it's woven and lightweight, so you can always buy these at your local fabric store, craft store. It's really easy to find. I purchased this on Amazon. I will post links to these, everything that I mentioned here, in the description box below in case you would like to easily find them yourselves. But yeah, I personally purchase everything online because I hate leaving my house. Now I have all of our materials, I think. Oh yes, you want pins. This is my pincushion. I like this little wristy band thing because it just makes it easier for me to just take out a pin, put it back. And you also want maybe a ruler, some weights, because if you are working with slippery fabric, you do want some fabric weights. Whatever you have lying around your house to weigh the fabric down to prevent it from slipping all over the place will be helpful. Yes. So, all right, those are our materials. Let's get started with cutting out our fabric. Okay, so when it comes to cutting out fabric, you just want to clear everything off. You don't need a cutting table like I have per se. This is kind of a makeshift cutting table, let's be honest. It's not a professional cutting table, but it is functionable. But if you don't have it, just clear out your floor, use your dining room. You can use your dining room table, you can use your bedroom floor, whatever you have at your disposal that's a flat, clean surface is definitely going to work to your benefit. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you've pre-washed your fabric, which I've already done. Usually when I get new fabric in the mail or I purchase new fabric, as soon as I get home, I toss it in the laundry, so it's just ready to use when inspiration strikes or I find a pattern that I have to make immediately. And you also want to make sure that you iron your fabric before you start cutting out the pieces, just to make sure that everything is as even and flat as possible. And thankfully this Crepe de Chine is very forgiving on top of this cork board. One tip for working with slippery fabric, you want to stabilize it as much as possible. So one tip is to use tissue paper, to line the floor or tabletop with tissue paper and lay your slippery fabric on top of that. That will prevent it or help it prevent it from slipping around and whatnot. However, this corkboard table is doing an excellent job of stabilizing this Crepe de Chine. So I do not actually need tissue paper. So this fabric is about, I'm gonna say 45 inches in width, and you'll notice that some fabrics come in either 60 inches or 45 inches in width, and you always wanna look on your pattern to see how they recommend cutting out your pattern pieces based on the width of the fabric that you are working with. Just wanna press everything out with your hand, and I'm not gonna lie, slippery fabrics are no picnic to work with. So here we are. So here's one skirt piece, and here's the other skirt piece. If you can't tell already, sewing is an event. You have to spread out, stop what you're doing, clear your schedule for the day, and just spread out. So here we have pattern piece 8, and this is the back for version 2 and the front and back for version 3. So if you are making version 3 without the pockets, this is both the front and the back. Since I'm going to be working with version 2, I'm going to be following the directions for version 2. So for version 2, it says cut 2 of this pattern piece. So I've laid it out on my fabric. The fold is closest to me, and then the selvage, the edge of the fabric, is closer to you, if that makes any sense. And here we have a direction for the grain line, and the grain line is basically, it follows the grain of the fabric, so that runs parallel to the selvage and the fold of the fabric, if that makes sense. So you always want to make sure that is parallel to the selvage. And you also want to be very conscious about, you know, being economical when it comes to, or less wasteful when it comes to cutting out your pattern pieces. So, you know, again, you can follow the directions on the pattern itself, or you can just use good judgment, which I generally do. So I am going to, let's see, flip this way. I'm gonna flip it backwards because that's what makes sense to me, I guess. So, but again, follow the directions. If you're new to sewing, follow the directions on the pattern. Do as I say, not as I do, if that makes sense. Oh look, and I didn't fold it correctly. Oh my goodness. All right, and because I'm working on a table, I'm not gonna pin all my pieces all at once, so I'm just gonna do this. Okay. Then I'm just going to, because I'm working with a corkboard, I can actually just pin it to the table like so, which is great for slippery fabrics. But if not, you can just use some, you know, just kind of use your hand and feel along the piece to make sure there are no folds or creases. And you also want to make sure that the straight edge is running parallel to the folded edge or the selvage, to make sure things are nice and even. And again, take your time, do not rush this. That's the beauty of slow fashion. You just get to enjoy, meditate, let your mind wander, or put on a good podcast, you know? Sewing is a great time to catch up on all those audio podcasts that I've been missing out on. And now for some weights. Let's find some heavy things around my craft room. We have a mermaid, so pop that down. We have some candles. There's some candles, and I guess some extra scissors or what have you. What else can we use? We have a camera lens. All right, Bob's your uncle. So now we are pretty much ready to cut out this pattern piece. Again, if you're working with quilting cotton, you don't have to go this crazy with weights, because quilting cotton does not slip around. Neither does chambray or the denim that I showed you. This is just pretty much for insurance for slippery fabrics. And you want to keep your hand down next to the edge that you're cutting out. And again, take your time. Do not rush this part. Especially with fussy fabrics. And you don't want to pull or put any pressure. You just want to press your fingers down next to the fabric. You don't want to pull, you don't want to warp anything. You just want to let the fabric do its thing, if that makes any sense. But yeah, just take your time. Use long, gentle strokes when it comes to using your fabric shears. All right, and it's always good, to keep a trash can right below you so you can easily chuck your scrap fabrics. And when you come to a notch, those little triangles or notches along your pattern, there are many ways to do this. I just like to use the tips of my of my cutting shears, fabric shears, to kind of just let me know where those notches are. So just to give myself a little reminder or visual when I am matching up my notches when I'm actually sewing. Okay, I've got the waistline. And then you can come around and pivot if it helps you. Sound effects optional. Okay, then we have a notch over here that I'm just gonna use my tip and snip into that. Okay, I think we're good. And we're left with this little piece of fabric over here. And I'm gonna take a look and see if there are any pattern pieces I can squeak in. Let's see. Ah, yes. We have part of the waistband that I can use. So again, the grain line is right here. So I am just gonna line that up with the selvage line over here. And then, just kind of pin that down. So, turn it flat. And because this is such a small little piece, you don't have to worry about weighing it down, I don't think. But, if you are not feeling confident, by all means, find a fabric weight to kind of give you that extra insurance. So yeah, we're just gonna come in and cut that out. And again, keep your hand on the piece to kind of stabilize it. You can even use a rotary cutter if you want to get really precise edges. But for that, you probably want a self-healing mat. Okay, get that. And then here, you'll notice there are two little marks for notches. And depending on the pattern you're using, sometimes these will appear as little triangles. You can cut out from them to mark them, but I just like using the tips of my sewing shears and just giving it a little snip. Like that. So it's visual. When you are working with the pattern, you can see where those notches are. So once I'm done cutting out a pattern piece, I like to keep the piece and the fabric pinned together so I know exactly which piece that I'm working with. So, because sometimes these pieces can all look alike and it can get a little confusing. So do yourself a favor and just keep all your pieces pinned together. All right, I have all my pattern pieces cut out. Hopefully you guys do too. So we're ready to move on to the next step, which is cutting out interfacing for our waistband pieces. So I'm gonna grab these guys and set my pattern pieces aside. Here's the leftover fabric that I have, and it's about, I want to say like about a yard, little over a yard or so. So this could possibly make an awesome Ogden cami at some point. So, that's always a bonus, having leftover fabric. Am I right? Am I right? I think I'm right. I'm gonna grab this scrap piece of interfacing that I saved from a previous project. Not all scrap fabric or interfacing is worth saving, but when it's something substantial like this, it does come in handy for these little pattern pieces that you have to interface. So I'm gonna grab this first piece, which is not cut on the folds, but I'm just gonna fold this over. And yeah, so let me see. Fits perfectly. So I'm just gonna pin it down, gonna cut this piece out. Da-da. And interfacing is a lot more stable than the fabric that I was using, the main fabric that I'm using for my skirt, so I don't have to worry about weighing it down. And you also want to pay attention to the notches as well. And now we are ready to fuse the interfacing to the main fabric. So let's go on over to the ironing board, which I forgot to mention at the beginning of the episode. You also need an iron and an ironing board. And a sewing machine. Fancy that. I like to give my pattern pieces a good press before I adhere the fusible interfacing. And you also want to make sure that you have your iron set to the setting that is appropriate for the fabric you're using. I have a nylon silk, so I have it set to 2, and I'm just gonna gently go over that. And sometimes it's really hard to tell, depending on the fabric you're using, which is the right and wrong side. And honestly, if you can't tell, it really doesn't matter which side. So I'm just gonna lay that on top there. And again, if you're working with this type of fusible interfacing, the bumpy side of the interfacing is the wrong side. And I'm just gonna go over this very gently, just kind of pressing. I'm not using any steam yet, if at all. So I'm just gonna go over that, make sure everything's nice and smooth. Oops. So I'm going over that. Okay. And you can flip it over and make sure that everything's smooth. But yeah, that's nice and smooth. And yeah, there's a little bit of overlap, but that is totally fine, totally fixable. Okay, so we have ironed on the interfacing to our waistband. We have all our pattern pieces cut out. I think we can get started sewing. So if you guys are ready, I say let's do this. Let's get sewing.